A single act of kindness on a rainy Tuesday shifted the power dynamic of Chicago's underworld. When a desperate librarian offered her only meal to a dying man in an alley, she had no idea she was feeding the most ruthless crime boss in the country. Now, she is his obsession. Chloe Henderson was a woman drowning in the cruel mathematics of poverty. At 26, she was the sole provider for her younger brother, Sam, a type 1 diabetic whose medical expenses consumed her meager paycheck before it even cleared the bank. Working as a head archivist at the decrepit West Side Community Library in Chicago paid her precisely $14.50 an hour. Her rent, owed to a notoriously predatory landlord named Thomas Caldwell, was $1,200 a month. It did not take a mathematician to see that Chloe was running out of time, money, and hope. It was late November, the kind of bitterly cold Tuesday evening where the rain felt like needles against exposed skin. Chloe locked the heavy oak doors of the library at 9 p.m., her stomach emitting a hollow, painful ache. She had skipped lunch to afford a bus pass for the week. Inside her faded canvas tote bag was half of a turkey and Swiss cheese sandwich wrapped in cheap aluminum foil. It was supposed to be her dinner, and if she was careful, half of her breakfast the next morning. Pulling her frayed wool scarf tighter around her neck, she hurried towards the bus stop on 43rd Street. The streetlights flickered, casting long, menacing shadows across the slick pavement. To save 3 minutes, Chloe took a shortcut through a narrow, unlit alleyway behind a row of abandoned storefronts. Halfway through the passage, she heard it, a ragged, wet gasp, followed by the heavy thud of a body collapsing against a brick wall. Chloe froze. Every survival instinct told her to run, to sprint toward the safety of the main road. But a soft groan echoed through the dark, laced with such profound agony that her conscience anchored her feet to the ground. She cautiously retrieved her cracked smartphone, turning on the flashlight. The beam of light illuminated a terrifying scene. A man was slumped behind a rusted dumpster, his long legs sprawled out in front of him. He was dressed in what was unmistakably a bespoke charcoal suit, though the fabric was torn and heavily stained with dark, wet patches. He looked to be in his early 30s, with sharp, aristocratic features, a strong jawline covered in dark stubble, and piercing, storm-grey eyes that squinted against her phone's light. He was dangerously pale. He had been shot, twice, from the looks of his abdomen, and he was shivering violently, the onset of shock taking hold. "Put the light away," the man rasped, his voice a low, gravelly command that carried an undeniable authority, even as he was bleeding out. Chloe immediately dropped the phone to her side, the ambient glow reflecting off the wet pavement. "You need an ambulance," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I have to call 911. "No cops," he hissed, his hand snapping out to grip her wrist with surprising strength. He wore a heavy gold signet ring engraved with a snarling lion. "No hospitals. If you call them, I'm dead. And if you stay here, you're dead." Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. She was terrified, yet as she looked down at this stranger, she didn't see a dangerous criminal. She saw a human being at the absolute end of his rope. His lips were chapped and blue, his body trembling from cold and blood loss. He looked utterly starved, his eyes sunken from what must have been days on the run. "I can't just leave you here to die," Chloe said softly. She knelt beside him, the wet asphalt soaking through her cheap jeans. She didn't have medical supplies. She didn't have a car to drive him to a discreet doctor. But she had something else. With shaking hands, Chloe unspooled her thick woolen scarf from her neck. "Press this against the wounds," she instructed, pressing the fabric into his large, cold hands. "Keep the pressure on." He took it, his storm-grey eyes locking onto hers, studying her face with an unsettling intensity. Next, she reached into a tote bag and pulled out the crumpled foil packet. She carefully unwrapped the remaining half of her turkey sandwich. It was soggy and unimpressive, but as the smell of the food hit the air, the man's gaze dropped to it. He was starving. "Here," Chloe said gently, pushing the sandwich into his hand. "You need energy if you're going to survive the night. Eat it." The stranger stared at the sandwich, then back up at her full, curvy figure, taking in her worn-out clothes, and the genuine, uncalculated concern etched across her face. In his world, people only gave things away to buy favors or beg for mercy. But this woman didn't know him. She had nothing, yet she was giving him the very thing she needed to survive. He took a bite. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. "What is your name?" he asked between swallows, his voice softening just a fraction. "Chloe," she whispered, standing up and taking a step back as the distant wail of police sirens pierced the night air. "Go, Chloe," he commanded, his eyes burning into hers, committing every detail of her face to memory. "Get out of here." Chloe didn't wait. She turned and ran out of the alley, boarding the late bus with a freezing neck and an empty stomach, completely unaware that she had just fed Dominic Castellano, the undisputed head of the Castellano crime family, and the most feared mafia boss in North America. For the next 4 days, Chloe's life continued its miserable downward spiral. The hunger pangs were a constant companion, only slightly masked by the cheap black coffee she drank in the library break room. Her brother's doctor, Dr. Richard Arris, had called twice to remind her that Sam's insulin prescription was ready for pickup, but her credit card had been declined. On Friday morning, Chloe arrived at her apartment to find a bright pink eviction notice taped to her front door. Thomas Caldwell had finally made good on his threats. She sat on the floor of her cramped living room and cried until she couldn't breathe. Then, on Monday, the impossible began to happen. Chloe was sitting at the library's front desk when her cell phone rang. It was Caldwell. Bracing herself for a screaming match, she answered defensively. "Mr. Caldwell, I swear I just need until Friday." "Miss Henderson," Caldwell interrupted, his voice uncharacteristically high-pitched and frantic. Please don't apologize. There's been a misunderstanding. A terrible, terrible mistake. Your rent is paid. In fact, your lease has been paid in full for the next 5 years. I've upgraded your unit's heating system, and the maintenance crew will be there in an hour to fix the plumbing. Please just tell them I'm cooperating." Before Chloe could ask who they were, Caldwell hung up. 2 hours later, Mrs. Higgins, the elderly library director, burst out of her office waving a piece of paper, her face pale with shock. "Chloe, you won't believe this. A corporate holding firm just wired $2 million into the library's public trust. We aren't shutting down. They stipulated that your position specifically receives a permanent salary increase and full medical benefits." Chloe felt the room spin. Full medical benefits. Sam's insulin was covered. Her mind raced. This wasn't luck. This was targeted. Someone was systematically wiping out every source of stress in her life. The answer arrived precisely at 5 p.m. As Chloe locked the library doors, a sleek, heavily tinted black Cadillac Escalade pulled up to the curb. The rear door opened, and a man stepped out. He wasn't the man from the alley. This man was older, built like a tank, wearing a sharp navy suit and a neutral expression. "Chloe Henderson," the man said. It wasn't a question. "My name is Enzo Bianchi. My employer would like the honor of buying you dinner." Panic flared in Chloe's chest. "I don't know who your employer is, but I'm going home." Enzo didn't move aggressively, but he planted himself between her and the bus stop. "Miss Henderson, my employer ate a turkey and Swiss sandwich last Tuesday night. He is very eager to repay the favor. Chloe's breath hitched. The man in the alley, against her better judgment, and driven by an overwhelming mix of fear and curiosity, she got into the SUV. The interior smelled of expensive leather and cedar. They drove in complete silence for 20 minutes, pulling into the private underground parking garage of Laura, the most exclusive and secretive restaurant in downtown Chicago. Enzo escorted her through a private elevator that opened directly into a lavish, dimly lit dining room that overlooked the glittering city skyline. The restaurant was completely empty, save for a single table set for two in the center of the room. Sitting at the table was the stranger. He looked entirely different. The blood and grime were gone, replaced by an aura of immaculate, terrifying power. He wore a custom black Tom Ford suit that hugged his broad shoulders, completely concealing whatever bandages wrapped his torso. His dark hair was styled back, and those same storm-grey eyes locked onto her as she entered. Dominic Castellano stood up, pulling out a chair for her. "Chloe, who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay strong. She stood frozen, clutching her cheap canvas bag against her curvy frame like a shield. "My name is Dominic Castellano," he said smoothly, gesturing for her to sit. "And you saved my life." Chloe reluctantly took the seat. She recognized the name immediately. Everyone in Chicago knew the name Castellano. They owned the ports, the unions, and half the politicians in the state. They were ruthless. You're a mobster," she stammered. Dominic smiled, a predatory but surprisingly warm expression. "I am a businessman who operates in gray areas. But tonight, I am just a man who owes a massive debt to a beautiful librarian." Waiters materialized from the shadows, placing silver platters of food on the table. Truffle risotto, butter-poached lobster, wagyu beef, and towering desserts. "You gave me your last meal, Chloe," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave, heavy with emotion. "My men investigated. We found out about your brother, your landlord, your job. You were starving, freezing, and financially ruined. Yet you didn't hesitate to give a dying stranger the only food you had." He leaned across the table, his gaze intoxicatingly intense. "In my world, loyalty and kindness are bought with blood. What you did was pure, and I protect what is pure." "I didn't do it for a reward," Chloe said, pushing the plate of expensive food away slightly. "I did it because you were dying. I don't want dirty money, Mr. Castellano." Dominic's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being rejected. The money is clean enough, and the name is Dominic. You will eat, Chloe. You haven't had a proper meal in weeks. As he spoke, Enzo suddenly stepped into the dining room, his phone pressed to his ear. His neutral expression had shattered into one of grim urgency. "Boss," Enzo interrupted, ignoring protocol. "We have a problem. Viktor Sokolov's men just breached the lower perimeter. They tracked us here." Dominic's eyes darkened, the gentlemanly facade instantly melting away to reveal the cold-blooded killer beneath. He reached under his bespoke jacket, drawing a heavy, suppressed tactical pistol. "Stay behind me, Chloe," Dominic commanded, his voice lethal. "It seems our dinner date is going to be slightly delayed." The serene, luxurious atmosphere of Laura shattered in a deafening instant. The heavy mahogany doors at the entrance of the private dining room splintered inward, groaning under the force of a tactical breaching ram. Before the wood would even hit the plush carpet, the room was swarming with armed men wearing tactical gear, their faces concealed by dark balaclavas. Dominic did not flinch. He moved with the terrifying, predatory speed of a man who had spent his entire life anticipating violence. Before Chloe could even process the sound of the door breaking, Dominic's massive arm wrapped tightly around her waist, He practically hurled her behind the thick, marble-topped bar situated at the far end of the room, his large body covering hers as the first volley of automatic gunfire erupted. Crystal chandeliers exploded above them, raining a terrifying shower of glass and sparks down onto the pristine tables. The smell of expensive roasted meats was instantly replaced by the acrid, metallic stench of gunpowder and cordite. "Keep your head down and cover your ears!" Dominic roared over the deafening cacophony. His storm-grey eyes were entirely devoid of the warmth they had held mere seconds ago. They were now the eyes of a ruthless killer, calculating trajectories and blind spots. Enzo, the stoic driver, was already in motion. He had flipped a heavy oak dining table onto its side, using it as temporary cover while returning fire with a suppressed Heckler & Koch MP5 he had pulled from a hidden holster inside his coat. Enzo fired in precise, controlled bursts, dropping 2 of Viktor Sokolov's mercenaries before they could even cross the threshold. "Boss, there are too many," Enzo shouted, ejecting a spent magazine and slamming a fresh one home. "We need to use the service elevator." "I'm getting her out of here," Dominic yelled back, racking the slide of his pistol. Chloe was curled into a tight ball, her hands pressed desperately against her ears. She was a librarian. Her days were spent organizing Dewey Decimal Systems and gently scolding teenagers for talking too loudly. The sheer volume of the violence around her was paralyzing. Her breath came in short, hyperventilating gasps. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for a bullet to tear through the marble and end her life. Suddenly she felt a strong, calloused hand grip her chin, forcing her to look up. Dominic's face was inches from hers. Despite the chaos, his touch was surprisingly gentle. "Look at me, Chloe," he commanded, his voice slicing through her panic like a sharpened blade. "Breathe. You are not going to die tonight. I swear on my life, nobody is going to touch you. Do you trust me?" She didn't know him. She knew he was a criminal, a murderer, a man who ruled Chicago's underworld with an iron fist. But as she stared into his unwavering eyes, she saw the absolute certainty of his promise. She nodded, her whole body trembling. "Good. When I say run, you run to the steel door on your left. Do not stop." Dominic stood up from behind the bar, exposing himself to the barrage of bullets. He fired 3 shots in rapid succession. Chloe didn't look to see where they landed, but the immediate cessation of incoming fire from the left flank told her all she needed to know. "Run!" he barked. Chloe scrambled to her feet and sprinted. The 4 seconds it took to cross the kitchen threshold felt like an eternity. Dominic was right behind her, his large frame acting as a human shield. Enzo followed, laying down suppressive fire before throwing a flashbang grenade into the dining room. The brilliant white flash and concussive boom bought them the time they needed. They burst into the commercial kitchen. Terrified chefs and line cooks were already huddled in the walk-in freezers. Dominic didn't spare them a glance. He grabbed Chloe's hand, his grip tight and secure, and pulled her toward the freight elevator at the back. Enzo punched in a security code, and the heavy metal grate slid open. As they descended into the subterranean loading dock, the adrenaline began to wear off, leaving Chloe weak-kneed and gasping. She looked down at Dominic's immaculate Tom Ford suit. The left side of his jacket was torn, a fresh, dark stain blooming across the expensive fabric. A bullet had grazed his ribs, reopening one of the wounds from the alleyway. "You're bleeding," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking. "It's nothing," Dominic dismissed coldly, his eyes fixed on the elevator floor numbers. He pulled a burner phone from his pocket, dialing a secure number. "Leo, it's Dominic. Sokolov just hit La Aura. Yes, a full strike team. Bring the heavily armored detail to the South Loop extraction point. Now." He hung up, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles jumped beneath his skin. Enzo looked at his boss, his expression grim. "Nobody knew we were dining here tonight, boss. Only the inner circle. Sokolov shouldn't have been able to track us." "I know," Dominic said quietly, the lethal promise in his voice sending a shiver down Chloe's spine. "We have a rat, and when I find out who it is, I am going to make them beg for a quick death." The elevator chimed, opening into a damp, dimly lit concrete garage. A heavily modified, bulletproof Mercedes G-Wagon was idling in the shadows. Enzo took the driver's seat, while Dominic ushered Chloe into the reinforced back seat, climbing in right behind her. As the SUV tore out of the garage and sped into the rainy Chicago night, Chloe stared out the tinted window at the blurred city lights. She realized with a sinking feeling that her life, the quiet, desperate struggle of Chloe Henderson, was over. By sharing her sandwich with a dying man, she had inadvertently chained herself to a monster. And the most terrifying part was that sitting next to him in the dark, smelling his cologne and the faint scent of blood, she felt safer than she had ever felt in her entire life. The Castellano estate was a sprawling, impenetrable fortress tucked away in the dense, forested hills of Lake Forest, completely hidden from the public eye. Surrounded by 12-foot iron fences, biometric security gates, and armed patrols walking the perimeter with attack dogs, it looked more like a military compound than a home. By the time the armored Mercedes pulled up to the grand stone portico, it was past midnight. Chloe stepped out of the vehicle, her cheap canvas tote bag clutched to her chest, feeling incredibly small beneath the towering columns of the mansion. The estate was humming with activity. Dozens of men in dark suits, armed with heavy artillery, were securing the grounds. Inside, the house was a masterpiece of old-world Italian wealth, marble floors, Renaissance paintings, and soaring, vaulted ceilings. But Dominic ignored the grandeur. He immediately ordered his personal medical team to the drawing room, insisting they check Chloe for injuries first. "I'm fine," she protested, swatting away a man with a stethoscope. "I don't have a scratch on me." "Look at yourself. You're bleeding again." Dominic waved the doctors off, dismissing them from the room with a sharp flick of his wrist. He unbuttoned his ruined suit jacket and let it drop to the floor, wincing slightly as he removed his blood-soaked dress shirt. Beneath it, his heavily muscled torso was wrapped in stark white bandages, now stained crimson on the left side. He sat heavily on a leather Chesterfield sofa, gesturing to a medical kit left on the table. "I don't trust them tonight," he said quietly, looking up at Chloe. "I only trust you. Change the dressing." Chloe hesitated, her heart hammering. She walked over, her hands trembling as she opened the antiseptic wipes. She knelt between his knees, peeling back the ruined bandages. The bullet graze was shallow, but it had torn the stitches from his previous gunshot wounds. As she worked, carefully cleaning the blood from his warm, hard skin, Dominic watched her. His intense gaze traced the curve of her cheek, the softness of her lips, the genuine care in her eyes. In a world defined by betrayal, greed, and violence, her kindness was a blinding anomaly. "Why did you do it, Chloe?" he asked softly, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "In the alley. You had nothing. You were starving. Why didn't you walk away?" Chloe paused, pressing a fresh gauze pad against his side. "Because my brother Sam always told me that the moment we stop helping people in the darkness wins. You were dying. You were a human being. That's all that mattered." Dominic reached up, his large hand gently cupping her face. His thumb stroked her cheekbone. "You are too good for this world, Mia Luce. My light," he murmured. "Sokolov didn't just come to kill me tonight. He came to take you. He found out about the woman who saved me. He knew you were my weakness." Chloe gasped, dropping her hands. Me? But I'm nobody. You are everything, Dominic corrected, his tone leaving no room for argument. From the moment you gave me that food, you became mine to protect. I paid your landlord. I funded your library. I took care of your brother's medication. And I will burn this entire city to ash before I let Sokolov touch a single hair on your head. Before Chloe could process the sheer magnitude of his confession, the heavy oak doors of the drawing room swung open. Enzo entered, dragging a battered and bleeding man by the collar of his expensive suit. He threw the man onto the Persian rug. It was Leo Rossi, Dominic's trusted underboss. Leo was coughing up blood, his face bruised and swollen. He looked up at Dominic with wide, terrified eyes. "Boss, Dominic, please, you have to listen to me," Leo begged, scrambling to his knees. Dominic didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The sudden, suffocating drop in the room's temperature was enough. He stood up from the sofa, ignoring his wounds, and walked slowly toward Leo. "You sold the location to Sokolov," Dominic stated flatly. It wasn't a question. "Sokolov approached me," Leo cried out, tears cutting through the grime on his face. "He said if I gave him your location, he'd back my claim to take over the Southside ports. He promised he wouldn't touch the family. He just wanted you, Dom. He said your obsession with this librarian girl was making you weak." Chloe stepped back, horrified by the brutal reality unfolding in front of her. Dominic looked down at the man who had been his second-in-command for a decade. "You endangered the woman I owe my life to. You brought a war to my dinner table." Dominic reached over to a decorative table, picking up a heavy silver letter opener. He didn't shout. He didn't rant. With terrifying, calculated precision, Dominic grabbed Leo by the throat, hoisting him slightly off the ground, and drove the silver blade directly into the traitor's chest. Leo gasped, a sickening gurgle escaping his lips as his eyes rolled back. Dominic dropped him, letting the lifeless body hit the floor with a dull thud. Chloe clamped a hand over her mouth, a muffled scream tearing from her throat. She backed away until she hit the wall, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. He had just murdered a man in front of her without blinking. Dominic pulled a silk handkerchief from his pocket, calmly wiping the blood from his hands. He turned to Chloe, the coldness in his eyes softening as he took in her fear. He closed the distance between them, ignoring the corpse on the floor. He placed his hands on the wall on either side of her head, trapping her in his intoxicating, dangerous orbit. "This is who I am, Chloe," Dominic whispered, leaning in until his lips brushed against her ear. "I am a monster. I am the darkness you fight against. But I am your monster now. Whoever tries to hurt you, whoever threatens your brother, they will meet the same fate." Tears spilled down Chloe's cheeks. She should run. She should scream for the police. But as she looked up into the eyes of America's most feared mafia boss, she realized the terrifying truth. Thomas Caldwell would never harass her again. Sam would never go without his insulin. She would never go hungry again. Dominic gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, leaning down to press a soft, commanding kiss to her trembling lips. "You saved my life for half a sandwich," Dominic murmured against her mouth. "In return, I am giving you my empire. Welcome to the family, Chloe." She closed her eyes, leaning into the touch of the devil who had become her guardian angel. She was a broke librarian no more. She was the untouchable queen of the Castellano syndicate. Did Chloe make a deal with the devil, or did she finally find the ultimate protector? The Castellano empire is ruthless, but Dominic's obsession with Chloe just might be his most dangerous weapon yet. If you were glued to your screen watching this intense mafia romance unfold, smash that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss our next thrilling story. Who do you think Sokolov will send next? Drop a comment below.